Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, Tacitus today, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about compelled speech, where the state, or anyone for that matter, but the state attempts to compel you, force you under threat, sometimes quite brutal threat, to purport or pretend to believe in certain ideological positions. For example, if someone says, I identify as a cat, or I'm a man, but I identify as a woman, then and you say, no, I'm still going to call you by your original name, so I'm still going to call you Billy Bob instead of Billie Jean, and then that's now a matter where the state will directly intervene. This is across the Western world. The state will intervene and say, well, if you don't accept that person's new pronouns, and they have the right to change their pronoun every day, every minute of every day, and you don't recognize that, then you are committing what is tantamount to a criminal act and is now a police matter, a state matter. The resources of the state will come after you through the police, Department of Prosecutions, courts, and so on. So you're compelling someone to speak in a certain way. And even if the police don't, or the state doesn't directly buy into it, in other words, you're not dragged off by the police and thrown in prison, even if that happens, many institutions now, businesses, public service institutions, and so on, will dismiss you from employment you're at, and then they'll make sure that you won't find other employment in that, certainly in that field at least. And so you're being compelled, if not directly by direct force of the state and its organs and apparatus, but by the threat of, well, you know, you're going to, you're never going to have a job again, you know, that sort of thing. So you'll never work in this town again. So this is, again, it's compelled speech. Your agreement isn't being sought. You can't even just opt out and say, well, look, I won't use any name for that person. You know, I'll refer to them as sort of, hey, you, or something. You know, I don't know. So I won't go against you, but I won't support. No, you can't do that. You must buy into this 100%. We are compelling you not only to have certain speech, but to purport to believe in things that you know are not true. And of course, it's the ultimate humiliation and degradation when you're forced to do that. And the fact that it's happening in the Western world today and is happening with great vigor, much aggressiveness, is just I think a testament to how far down the shithole we've all gone and allowed the globalists to do this to us, and our spineless, useless political representatives have happily, and again, if not aggressively, gone along with all this. But compelling speech, does it work? Has it ever worked, really? If you look at the fall of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, which was under Soviet control for 35, 40 years, whatever it was, and the Soviet Union was under communist control for 60 plus years, then or getting on for 70 years. Pretty much everyone who was alive, or most people alive in the Soviet Union, had only ever known communism, and yet they threw it off with once it was gone, it was gone, and it surprised me how many people came out in the Soviet Union and said that, well, they never believed all that crap that the communists were saying. They knew that everything in the newspaper, on the television, was lies and nonsense, and they knew that they were being lied to and cheated and fucked over every day, and they knew that the law was applied arbitrarily. They knew that they could be judged ideologically without any codified law. They knew all these sort of things, and but they pretended that they enjoyed it or went along with it. And to some extent, when all the power of the state can be directed against you for some minor ideological offence, like you take out from the library, you take a book about Shakespeare, then ideologically some secret police goon somewhere is this guy took out a book about Shakespeare, that means he loves Western capitalism. He's a Nazi. He's a fascist. He's an enemy of the revolution. He's an enemy of the people. Let's take the motherfucker out back and shoot him. And so they had these arbitrary powers to do those sorts of things, or send them to the prisons in Siberia where your chances of survival were not good. So these are, but the argument was that no one believed in all that stuff, and they believed certain things as part of practical reality. For example, when Russia started to, or the Soviet Union rather, started to sort of soften their stance a lot of thing. This is before the collapse. Then they started to allow people to leave who wanted to, and so quite a few people were leaving and coming to the West, and I met some of these people and spoke to them, and they had this interesting thing. The first time they arrived in, this is a family that arrived in Sydney, and they managed somehow to illegally squirrel away quite a bit of gold while they're in Russia, and able to then convert that into US dollars or Western currencies. They had a bit of money in their pockets when they arrived, and so they went into one of the first things they did was they went into a supermarket, a grocery store, and they couldn't believe that all the shelves were full. They'd never seen a grocery store with full shelves before, and such a variety of merchandise. So they just assumed they'd arrived. They just happened to have walked into this grocery store on the day that the deliveries had arrived, and they had full shelves that by tomorrow there'd be nothing on those shelves, because the idea of a grocery store with merchandise on the shelves was something that was pretty much unheard of during the communist era. And so they went on this massive buying spree, thinking, holy crap, we've just arrived at the exact right moment, not understanding that full shelves are the norm in a Western country, or a capitalist Western country, and the empty shelves are not the norm. So anyway, they had that. But talking to them, they said there's even a teacher. One of them had been a teacher teaching political ideology, so their job was to indoctrinate the Soviet Union children with all sorts of propaganda about how wonderful communism was, and so on. And part of his job was to say, well, communism is the most advanced, wonderful, best system ever in human history. And if you don't think that, then not only are you a Nazi, but you're also an enemy of all the people, but you're also mentally unbalanced. You must therefore be mad, because if you disagree, you must therefore be Hitler. But on top of that, you must therefore be mentally unbalanced, because communism, we assert communism is the best system ever. And if you don't think that, then you're a mentally deranged Hitler. So that was something that he had to teach the children, the students. So I said, you never believe it? He said, no, I never believed in it. It's all crap. But if you're a teacher, teachers were considered more important than, say, doctors and engineers and things like that. So as a teacher, you had a privileged position. You'd get allocated a better apartment. You'd have access to better shops where you didn't have to queue. And sometimes, if you're used to queuing an hour, 2 hours a day just to get bread, then and you get elevated, you're a teacher and you get access to a shop where you don't have to queue. You can just go straight and buy your bread and walk out again. Those are huge changes to your quality of life. And he has to get judged and evaluated by secret police goons who say, yep, he's a good ideological fanatic. Yep, he's our boy. We own him. But secretly, he knew it was all a load of, at least that's what he said to me. It was all a load of crap, and he never believed me. He came out with examples of the nonsense he was supposed to teach, but they were compelling his speech. But in return, he said, well, why would I go against that? If I go against that, they may put me in prison. They'll also go after my mother, or my parents, or my wife, or the kids. Or so. They'll harass me in all sorts of ways. So if I go against them, I achieve nothing. I then get a crappier apartment to live in, or and so on and so forth. He said the easiest thing to do is to pretend that they own me psychologically and just go along with it. And but I couldn't wait to get out of the place and that sort of thing. So it does compel speech work. Now, if we go back to, say, the time of the English philosopher and political theorist John Locke, and by the way, Locke's writings were very influential. If you look at quite a few of his sentiments, were included in the American Declaration of Independence and the framing of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, as an example, and James Madison were as well as Alexander Hamilton, by the way, were influenced quite a bit by the writings of John Locke. And one of the, among other things, but one of the things that he came out with is you can't really successfully compel speech through threat and brutality. It might work for a short time, or people might pretend to go along with it, but in reality it doesn't work, and all it does is build up a resentment against the power of the state, which at some point will explode, and as in like the French Revolution, things like that will explode, and it'll become it'll go out of control, and those that have brutally tried to enforce the things previously will end up maybe not doing so good when things do explode. So you're saying you can't compel speech, well, not successfully compel speech through state power and threat. At the time, of course, that there weren't the mass police forces and other things. So what the state tended to do then is find someone they could point to say, well, there's the bad guy, and then punish them with hideous brutality in order to act as a deterrent for others, because having police everywhere was quite expensive, and the state didn't want to do that. This is when taxation would have been, one penny in the dollar, that sort of thing. So, so compelling speech doesn't work, Locke argued, and you'd agree. But most of this, whether be Hayek talking about market intrusion is the road to serfdom and that sort of thing, or John Maynard Keynes talking about pump priming the economy using government spending. All these people, whether you look at them as being purely social philosophers or socio-economic philosophers, is almost beside the point. Karl Marx is another one. They were deeply influenced by the times that they lived in, understandably, deeply influenced by the times they lived in. Also, their prescriptions were assuming that the things they saw around them were the natural state of affairs and would be unchanged or unchanging over time. Therefore, their prescriptions or remedies were, or their philosophies rather, were put forward on the basis that this is a remedy for the problems I see around me now, and those remedies, or what I see around me now, is the natural state of affairs that will be forever unchanging. So the remedies I propose are for these things around me today. So Locke, for example, was writing, with fresh memories of the English Civil War and those sorts of things going on. If you look at the later writings of various other philosophers were around the time of the French Revolution or immediately after it. So the Reign of Terror was fresh on everyone's minds, and the excesses, they're very obvious and bloody excesses of that. John Maynard Keynes was talking about the Great Depression. So he perceived that the boom, the 1920s boom and the 1929, 1930s bust, his prescriptions, and made eminent sense at the time, by the way, his prescriptions were such that they were to solve the problems of the boom-bust cycle and to use government pump prime spending, such as public works, in order to rejuvenate an economy that had gone into bust, and then to back off the spending when the economy was in some sort of a boom situation. So his prescriptions were very much around the Great Depression and that boom bust, and that was about that. If you look at Hayek, Hayek was deeply influenced by the post World War I inflation in Germany and other parts of Central Europe. It wasn't uniquely German at the time, and also the effect of the Soviet intrusion into, as in communist intrusion into market forces. So Hayek argued that if everything was being allocated efficiently by market forces and market signals coming back to what was the most efficient allocation of resources, then there would be, theoretically, there would be no waste or very little waste, and thus everybody would benefit. But if you don't do that, Hayek theorized, then resources are not allocated efficiently. There is a great waste. The rich will always look after themselves. Therefore, the mass of the population in this controlled economy become, in effect, serfs, because they have no opportunity to really materially improve themselves, given the market intrusion. There's no market signals. Resources not allocated efficiently. Markets can't operate efficiently. Therefore, we all end up in Hayek's perception as serfs. But this is something that, where do we, and Locke touched on this, and again, the founders of the American Republic tried to come to grips with this as to what are the trade-offs we have. I mean, no one can create a perfect government. People are imperfect. The idea that equal outcomes to the lowest common denominator is a paradise or a perfect society is just utter and absolute and total nonsense. But there are people around that sort of hold that view. By the same token, runaway capitalism, we get greedy capitalist barons organising monopolies and cartels for themselves, then that's hardly a successful way of doing things. Where is the in between? Now, something that Locke touched on, and again, it was something that was looked at in the following the American Revolution. What freedoms can the individual concede in return for their rights being protected? Well, I give up the freedom, the arbitrary freedom to do this, because the state will protect my rights. So I have the right to free speech, for example. So the state, the power of the state, the organs of the state will protect that right. I have the right to, not be attacked in the street. So the state will provide a police force that will arrest people who do that and take them before the courts. I have the right to a trial by jury of my peers, and so on. So the state, what rights will the state protect, and what freedoms do I need to give up for that? So I might give up the freedom to keep all the money that I earn. So I'll give some of that money in taxation. I'll give some of that money to the state. In return, they guarantee my rights. So what are the trade-offs? How many are there? And in what areas should there be trade-offs? What is desirable? What do the people want? I don't have the right to say, well, my neighbour's got a pretty good vegetable patch there, and I'm feeling a bit hungry. What I'll do is discover and take my neighbour's vegetables. And if my neighbour doesn't like it, I'll go shoot him. So should that be called a freedom? Well, no, we need laws to regulate that, so you can't go stealing other people's shit, and you can't go, killing people. That the state must have that power for it to remain order in society. Okay, all right, let's go to an orderly society. What do we need to do to create an orderly society? What laws do we need? How should they be enforced? How brutally should they be enforced? And so on. Now, Locke was writing at a time when habeas corpus was still up for grabs. It had a very patchy sort of application during the time. But we would consider it today to be essential. Yet already in our times, habeas corpus, that is, the state cannot arbitrarily arrest someone and hold them without charge. And if they are to be charged, they must be brought before a judge and a jury of their peers for judgment. Now, that was a huge break on the power of the state, that the state just can't arbitrarily arrest a citizen they don't like, who may have committed no crime, or the state can't simply invent wonderful crimes. So you invented that crime. You have to take it in front of an independent court and a jury of the peers. Now that was part of the habeas corpus, or the wider, habeas corpus there, as a restriction on state power, to limit state. In other words, to prevent political prisoners. Really, that was what it was all about. And now we see that's been thrown out the window today. And now this argument over habeas corpus was happening 300 years ago, or even longer if you look at, say, the Roman courts and Greek courts, so thousands of years, and the matter's still not fucking solved, habeas corpus. If we look at, say, the January 6th, the government in the US, the government is just arbitrarily arresting people without there being any charge, without there being any clear crime or even a misdemeanor being committed. And the lies upon lies upon lies that are being told about what happened on that. So it's clearly a political, political ideological farce, top to bottom. But people are being held arbitrarily by the state, and habeas corpus effectively doesn't exist. I mean, who would even want a situation like that to occur, whether you don't like the people or not? So it shows that the arguments and discussions and the concerns that Locke had, and indeed the founding fathers of the US had, are still alive today. These questions have still not been settled. Now, you'd think, well, the people that are, as in the government people that are bringing prosecutions, without regard to habeas corpus, Department of Prosecutions, FBI officers, and indeed the politicised activist judges that are going along with it, they should be brought before the courts, proper independent courts, and they should be the ones that are facing prison terms. Would they like it if habeas corpus thrown out the window and they were just arbitrarily detained? And of course they wouldn't. They'd be screaming, habeas corpus, where's the law? Where's the law to protect me? Well, you just trashed those fucking laws, you activist shithead. So these are things that are still reverberating today. So the discussions of Locke and indeed others around the time, even to in a different way, Hobbes and those other writers were touching on some of these same things. But coming back to the idea of compelled speech, we live in an era now, a globalist era, where in order to force the globalist project on us, on Western citizens who don't want it, they're trying to, and to some degree, being successful in compelling speech. The amount of people that I talk to, that I know, that just talk in global, they've got no comprehension of what they're talking about. They just regurgitate globalist talking points as if that somehow represents an understanding or knowledge of the situation when there's nothing of the sort. Don't you think the mass migration is too high? Oh no, we don't have enough workers. The economy can't grow without them. And again, just blurting out globalist talking points. Now, you wouldn't necessarily call that compelled speech, rather than encouraged and fostered speech. But compelled speech is the illustration I used earlier on. If you don't use someone's pronoun, you can be arrested for it. For fuck's sake, can you believe that? I don't believe I'm saying it. But also, if you talk out, say, well, I don't agree with mass migration, or I don't agree with LGBTQ in schools or something, those sorts of things, which are controversial issues. I agree. If you say that, then you can find yourself out of a job, or you're being denied banking services, or the apparatus of the state, or the secondary apparatus of the state, which is like the business and the public service and the courts and all that they'll come after you as well. The chances are you're going to be dragged in front of an activist judge. Anything you look at on TV or the movies is a political indoctrination program, not entertainment, and on it goes. So this is still the issues raised by John Locke. I would argue in terms of political or socio-political theory, one of the great thinkers of certainly the modern era, that we're actually still arguing over those same things now, 300 years later, for fuck's sake. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.